right, so my name is Amina, and I am a researcher with the Canadian FASD Research Network, and I am here hosting this webinar today. I've also hosted the previous two, so excited to be back to do this new webinar. My research has mainly been in supports and interventions for children, adolescents, and adults with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And so just a little bit about, a little bit of housekeeping items. We will be recording this presentation and it will be available on the CanFASD YouTube channel. This Zoom has the Q&A function where participants can ask questions and upvote these questions so that the most common will rise up top. There will be time after the presentation to have the speakers answer any questions that are put forward. An important step in reconciliation is the acknowledgement of traditional treaty lands and recognition for the people of the territory. The Canada FASD Research Network recognizes the historical significance and contributions of Indigenous peoples and their cultures and understands the important role that the Indigenous community plays today and in the future. We acknowledge that we live, work, and meet on traditional territories across Canada of many of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. So this is our third and final installment of our sensory webinar series. You can find the links to part 1 and 2 in the chat. Part 1 of the series introduced sensory processing and interoceptive sensory awareness. Part 2 explored proprioception and vestibular processing and the assessment process. Part 3 today will introduce 5 more sensory areas, and as well as touching on mental health and sensory processing. I would now like to introduce our presenters for today, Lisa Brownstone and Shana Mohr. Lisa Brownstone is a retired occupational therapist living in Regina, Saskatchewan. She has a master's degree in community health and epidemiology. Her particular areas of focus include social policy and community development, program evaluation and research, as well as occupational therapy. Lisa Brownstone has received a number of awards for her work over the years, including the YWCA's 2008 Women of Distinction Awards in the area of wellness, recreation, and healthy living. She has a long history of working with people with FASD. This includes assessments and interventions for people with concurrent disorders such as FASD, intellectual disability, childhood trauma, and mental health illnesses. She has authored studies exploring homelessness in adults with FASD, developed an FASD mentoring program, conducted evaluations of FASD support programs, and provided occupational therapy services for people with FASD. Shana is the training manager for the FASD network of Saskatchewan. She has trained hundreds of professionals, caregivers, and individuals with intellectual disabilities about the complexities of FASD. Through her experiences, she has developed an intimate understanding of the services available for individuals with FASD. Shana believes in the need for more research to fill in the gaps in these services and to increase the accessibility for individuals with FASD and their caregivers. Shana is also the mom to an amazing daughter with FASD and motivates her unlimited passion for the cause. She's where Shana's dedication started and continues to be her most important teacher in the complex world of FASD. And with that, I will let the presenters take it away.
Hello, everybody, and we're really pleased to be back here and talking. I think first we want to show off our shirts. Both of us are wearing shirts provided by the Saskatchewan Network. This one's mine, and it's highlighting the red shoes. And Shana, why don't you talk about that? Because it's you folks who made them.
Yes, and so we jumped on board this year for recognition of FASD awareness with the Red Shoes Rocks movement because it creates positive awareness about FASD. And so at the FASD Network last week, we hosted a panel event, actually, and Lisa was one of our panel presenters as well. And we had a panel presentation with a caregiver, individual with FASD, a developmental pediatrician who diagnoses FASD, and a frontline worker. And we gave out these t-shirts. But how it kind of ties into the conversation today is when we decided to get t-shirts made at the FASD network, one of my requests was that they had to be sensory friendly t-shirts. We needed to ensure that the softness, knowing that lots of the people who we support are very tactile in their experiences and how they process the world through their sensory processing. And so we were able to ensure that the t-shirts are incredibly soft. We're getting lots of nice feedback about them, and everyone is really, really enjoying them. So create some positive awareness, but also really taking into account that the sensory profile of people with FASD.
And they do feel wonderful on. I can absolutely tell you that. And you don't get that scratchy feel that you often do with t-shirts. They're just really nice and soft. It's great to see them. I think before we start in on ours, we want to do a big thank you, and that's to Canada FASD Research Network for hosting these. I think it's a really important topic, and it started off with one hour session, and we just grew it from there. And CanFASD has been just really generous with time and resources. And Amina has been here throughout, and that's been really wonderful to have you here hosting us and making sure that we're on time and all those good things. And Kirsten, thank you in the background for setting up the whole process of Zooming with all of you.
Yes, thank you.
Is there anybody we've missed?
I don't think so, but second what Lisa said, a huge thank you to CanFASD and the staff with CanFASD to allow us to take this from one webinar to now 3. It's really, really exciting, and always incredibly appreciate the opportunity and the opportunity for myself to work with Lisa. I'm always excited when I get the opportunity to work with Lisa, because I learn all the time as well. So.
And ditto, I learn an incredible amount from you too. So maybe we can go to our slideshow and go to the next slide.
Okay, there we go.
Here we go. Yes. So today we're going to do a quick review of part 1s and 2. We're going to be sharing our experiences both as parents and professionals, as we have throughout. And there's some things to keep in mind. And those are that little changes add up to big changes. So even when you're making small changes, those are all going to add up, and changing our perceptions, changing our expectations, changing our environments, and changing how we live, work, and learn makes a huge difference. It's really important to note that not all occupational therapists are sensory based. There's some that focus on, for example, neurology. There's some that will focus on work kinds of issues, and some who are sensory based. So that when you're looking for an occupational therapist, you want to find one who has had that extra training in sensory areas, and hopefully in FASD as well. It's really important that we focus on changing environments and not the person. It's really hard to change the brain, and when it comes to sensory areas, I would really say that's very, very challenging, especially if there hasn't been early therapy and inputs. And so what we're talking about in these sessions is really changing the environment for them so that their sensory system can relax into it and be able to be the best that it can be.
Absolutely. I was going to add one thing. I was going to say one thing I always tell my kiddo is that you don't always have to be the one to change to fit in the world. The world needs to change to fit you as well.
Yes, absolutely. And finally, as we all know, FASD is really complex, and we're all different, and everybody with FASD is different. And no one size fits all. And so I think throughout today's session, we're going to be talking to both the complexity and that you need to look at the individual. So why don't you go ahead,
So I can share, well, I had a really fantastic intro, but a little bit more about myself. And, you know, as I said, as Amina said, I'm a parent to a child with FASD. She's 14. So I'll reference some stories from my life today and what that experience is. But one of the things that where my daughter is quite impacted is in her sensory profile. And so how her body and brain experience the world through a sensory lens is always very intriguing to me. I'm a huge fan of sensory-based occupational therapy. We've been lucky enough to have my daughter's gone to a sensory-based OT here in Saskatoon on like almost a weekly basis since she's been 5. And she's now 14, and I can hands down say that's the best support we've ever had in place for her. We've seen those differences, those changes happen, but as Lisa mentioned, it's all the little pieces that make the big changes, and those changes don't happen overnight. It takes time and consistency, and it's an occupational therapy, sensory-based OT is something I know as a parent I'm going to advocate probably across her lifespan for. And I think sometimes there's misconceptions around OT is only for children and youth. It's not, it's for adults as well. And as we're always learning, right? We never have this 100% figured out. And so as we go through different stages in life, different things happen. And we're going to chat more about mental health today and the impact of the sensory profile in mental health. And that's kind of the world we're living in right now. But I think that sensory piece makes such an impactful difference when we can understand. And I know lots of times in the sessions when I'm delivering training on FASD, I talk about how sometimes those sensory pieces are the hardest thing to figure out, but sometimes it's not the hardest thing to fix. It's those really concrete takeaways that we can, like Lisa said, switch the environment and make those changes so people who are experiencing sensory processing differences, they can fit, their bodies can relax, their brains can relax, and it sets them up for success. So kind of that's who I am. I could ramble on forever, but I'm going to throw it back to Lisa.
Okay, thank you. Again, that was a really in-depth introduction. I am a retired occupational therapist, and that means I no longer practice occupational therapy. I have lots of knowledge, but I don't provide assessments, and I don't provide any kind of intervention information around individuals. So if you have a specific question, I'm really not able to answer that. I have 2 children with FASD. My son is 42, my daughter is 34. And so lots of years of experience and growing understanding. You will know from his age that there was not very much out there for people with FASD when he was born. And so we really trial and errored, and mostly lots of error as we learn to live together. And truly, my kids have been amazing teachers. My daughter is 34, and she's 33, just about 34. And each one of my children has given me a grandchild, and I'm raising those 2 grandchildren at this point. So one is 18 and the other is 4. And so we've experienced the sensory world on a personal basis, as well as working in the area. So in parts 1 and part 2, we covered, we did an introduction to sensory processing and went over the assessment process. We did talked a bit about the sensory diet, interoception, vestibular sense, and proprioception sense. And of course, throughout shared our experiences with our children and their sensory processing. We're not going to review any of that. We'll take it that you can go back to parts 1 and part 2, and we really encourage you to do that. And we're going to jump in so that we can cover everything we want to cover today. So today we're going to focus, first of all, on mental health and sensory processing, and then go into touch and hearing and taste and smell and sight, and finish up from there. So I think we're going to start by kind of talking about our children and what they have experienced in terms of mental health and their sensory processing systems. We've decided to highlight this area because we know that about 90% of people with FASD have mental health issues. We also have a growing knowledge of the impact that sensory processing has on people with FASD, and that they also have challenges in that area. A relatively current study published in 2020 talks about 73% of the children that they assessed having sensory processing challenges. So we're gonna focus first of all on that, and we're gonna try and have a conversation about it.
Thanks, Lisa. I can start by sharing and then pass it back to you if that works.
Sure.
So my kiddo is 14, and mental health in our world has been at the forefront quite intensively. Over the past year, we have bouts of stability and bouts of instability, and I would say we're back in a place where stability has left for a little while, and mental health we're experiencing it quite significantly at the moment. And so one of the things that we're learning as we go through the mental health pieces that she is experiencing is how that impacts her sensory profile, and how her sensory profile is becoming heightened in response to some of the mental health stuff she's experiencing, as well as potentially can be a trigger for some of the mental health stuff she's experiencing as well. And so some examples that I've seen with my kiddo is, and I think we'll get more into it, is that tactile piece. And so when she's incredibly anxious, how her body feels the world gets really heightened. And so she is going to gravitate to, softer clothes. So sometimes, as a caregiver, it might be like, oh, I just bought you this and now you won't wear it. It's not that she won't wear something, but if she's really in a space that she's heightened mentally, she is going to gravitate, like I said, to the softest clothing that she can find. I actually have her closet sorted based on texture, not colors, not right. All her sweaters are based on, softness, and then she knows. And it's when she's heightened, she's going to gravitate, like I said, to the softer clothes, as well as one of the things I would say that we've really noticed lately, as well as sound, hearing. She has an incredibly heightened sense of hearing, and that has been a huge this time around, a huge trigger. And so when she's in spaces that are really noisy, if she doesn't have she needs to have a safe space to go to, a safe, quiet space to go to. She recognizes that, but also as mental health increases, sometimes the mental health can become a little bit more intense before she's able to get to that soft space. And so I think it just really, when we're talking about mental health and the sensory piece, they really they mesh together. And, or we've had experiences where we've had to take her into the hospital to get some extra help to get her regulated as a result of her mental health. And just even being in the space in the hospital, I remember at one point I had to take her in and she heard beeping. We were in a merge, right? And I could see her escalating as a result of all the different sensory. The world changed at the hospital, the smells changed, the lights changed, the bed changes, right? All these different experiences is now actually making her more anxious. And so just being aware, like when we're in those spaces, can you please dim the lights? Can we, and now as I think to myself, I should carry earplugs in my purse with her. So we're her ear deafeners. So when we go into those spaces, we can modify it so she can get the help she needs without having that sensory environment escalate her more. But I think the sensory profile crosses every sector, whether it's mental health, right? In every different system, the sensory profile significantly can impact someone's ability to function and stay. And I love how Lisa says we need to switch the environment and not the individual. And so that's kind of been our experience that we're living right now when it comes to mental health. And that's, I think we chatted in the past sessions about the sensory diet. And, you know, we live our world every day. We get up and we go through our world every day through a sensory-based lens. You know, and we think about the impacts, and we think about, you know, if my kiddo calls me from school and says, I'm really overwhelmed right now, my first response is we need to go somewhere safe and somewhere quiet. Where is there somewhere quiet? Can you go outside? Can you go to the, you know, the chapel? Can you go to this place? Can you go somewhere where the noise, right? Because then it just helps her body calm when she can remove some of that sensory, heightened sensory stuff that's happening around her. But anyway, like I said, I can always ramble on, so I'm going to hand it back to Lisa.
I think you really encapsulated the issues, and thank you so much for sharing what Keisha's going through at this point. Both of my kids have both anxiety and depression. And so the sensory world has been really important to that. I also have examples from going into emergency, and for example, putting on one of the hospital gowns is hard on my daughter's skin. And so right then and there, she becomes more anxious because she's so uncomfortable. So the tactile is fitting into the issues that she's having. And so that sensory world and how to make the environment easier for them is really, really important. And I think that in general, people in mental health settings who look at the sensory find that the sensory differences become elevated, and that makes sense because because of the issues around the mental health as well. So there are many mental health therapeutic programs who are finding that sensory activities assist in mental health treatment. So that's in general, and if they were looking specifically at FASD, that would be another step they should take. There are states in the US that have introduced sensory programs to reduce restraints in mental health facilities as well as in custody situations. And so that's really will be a place that people with FASD will be in both psychiatric facilities as well as correctional facilities. So both of those are really good movements that we've seen happening. As well, it's really important for mental health practitioners to set up their therapeutic environment to include sensory in their practice for people with FASD. Time and again, both with my adult children and other people that I've worked with, when you introduce the sensory into the therapies, doors open, and it can be an incredible process. And you know, the feedback that I've gotten from therapists is that from mental health practitioners is when they start bringing in the sensory, whether that be having a weighted blanket, the lighting in the room, the fidgets available, art and crafts available, that once they start doing that, the individual comes down off of their fright state, and they're able to do some real good therapeutic work as a result. I think that's been your experience as well, hasn't it?
Yes, that was just, yeah, I forgot to chat about that, is that, you know, my kiddo is engaged with mental health professionals, and she has a counselor who is absolutely amazing, along with her OT, who's phenomenal as well. But one of the things that has made, and we've gone through a few mental health professionals to try and find a good fit for her, but the distinction in why this mental health professional is such a fantastic fit is that she incorporates sensory activity into her therapeutic sessions. And one of the things that I have noticed is that strategies are staying. My kiddo's remembering them, she's using them. And one of the really cool things is they do the arts and crafts, or she has a sand table that, you know, they can put their hands and stuff. But also we're really lucky that our OT is attached to, or sorry, our counselor is actually attached to an occupational therapist. And so their offices are right beside each other. And so she has got permission that if the OT space is open, the sensory-based occupational therapist, that she can even go sit in the cocoon swing while they do their session. And so, because my kiddo responds to a lot of movement, it helps regulate her. And so all these different little add-ons have made such an impactful difference. And that's, I think that's the huge difference in the mental health support versus just sitting there and chatting about what's going on. But you're so right, Lisa, when you're keeping them busy and it's, you know, that tactile piece is opened or their movement is kind of opened, so much more can come from those sessions.
Yeah. And along with that, I think, is the kind of advocacy and self-advocacy that has to happen to for those pieces to be put into place. And when you talk about going before the fit was right, sometimes it takes a lot of looking to find the person, and it's very hard to change the way a ward is set up, in terms of, let's say, a psychiatric ward, to meet the needs of your child. So as both as parents, but also as people with FASD, we're doing a lot of advocacy work as our kids come into that particular system.
Absolutely.
So we should probably move along, or we're never going to get to this.
I know we can chat forever.
I know. So touch and tactile processing. Both of us could probably talk endlessly about this area, and we've, I think, touched on it a bit.
Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead with other experiences you and Keisha have had?
Yeah, so I know you had mentioned weighted blankets. You know, my kiddo slept with a weighted blanket quite a bit throughout her life. That deep pressure, she responds really well to that deep pressure, and it was kind of buried away. And as mental health has surfaced again, we've got it back out. And so, right, it really does help. As I think I've chatted about before, her bedroom is done very much through a sensory lens. She likes the soft stuff. She responds well to deep pressure. And so everything in her clothes have to feel a certain way. It was funny, you know, for many years she wouldn't wear blue jeans. That was a big thing. She didn't like how they felt on her. And this year she was able to wear, she's worn blue jeans a couple of times because she's in high school now. So it's, you know, we want to fit in as well, but they have all the rips in them. And so she said, I can wear them because my legs can breathe. So we have to find the most ripped up jeans that you can find. But it's not, you know, it's the style, but it also is like a way for her to wear, you know, stylish clothes. And she's saying, but my legs can breathe, they're open, and they don't feel like, you know, I can move in them and stuff. So that's kind of fun to see her experience new things as well. And I think part of she's a really cool self-advocate when it comes to her sensory profile, because she's been pretty uniquely supported, I think, in understanding how her body interprets the world. And so even, yeah, she knows what she needs in moments often, or if she, you know, in her tactile stuff, you know, I know she's had experiences where she's been at school and she said, Mom, if I'm wearing a piece of clothing that doesn't feel okay, or a part of my body showing, you know, maybe my shirt lifted up and, you know, my stomach's air is touching it or something, she said, then that's all I fixate on. That's all I think about is how uncomfortable my body is. And then I can't take in the world around me. And so I think that's going back to that sensory processing impacts every system, whether it's the education system, the legal system, it's across every sector.
Absolutely. Our skin is really the largest sensory organ in our body. And it really brings the outside in to us. And it establishes our unique identity as well as our security within the environment. And of course, the sensory information that we receive comes from wherever we receive it and goes up to the brain to inform the brain. The entire system is really quite sensitive and vulnerable to overstimulation, and that's because it has such important information to the brain about heat, about cold, about pain, about where the pain is or where the touching is, about pressure that's on our body. All of that information is coming in and going up. And so it's really important for us to be able to help that system be regulated. So my daughter as well, it was and still is quite sensitive. As a little baby, she actually cried when her clothes were changed, and because it hurt her skin, it turned out. To this day, she prefers light, soft clothing, and even though it says loose fitting for her, it has to be quite close fitting for her to feel secure in the world. And jeans to this day hurt. She did go through a period as a teen where she tried to wear jeans, but she really can't manage it. And luckily there's wonderful soft clothing available, and that's what she does.
Yes.
So we could probably go on from here to one of the things that I found really helpful is tapping. And tapping can be used to both wake up and help the system go to sleep. There's some techniques that are used in therapy that I'm not going to go into. One of them's brushing the skin. And for that, you'd need to have a good OT assessment and interventions provided. I think Keisha had that, didn't she?
Yes, we have a sensory brush. You can actually order them on Amazon. I think that's what they're called. And yeah, I know that I've used it quite a bit since she's been little. That's actually a good reminder. We should put that back in our toolkit. But she starts every OT session by brushing, right? I think it's the arms, the feet, the legs. Yeah, but it's a really good calming technique for her.
So I'm going to show you a tapping technique that I use with a lot of people. It's not therapy per se, but it is therapeutic. And so what I do is with people with FASD, I don't use knuckles because of proprioceptive challenges. They may hit themselves too hard. And we don't want to see that. So I use the fingertips, and some people do a whole talking kinds of things that people do. I am relaxed, I am happy, this is a good place that I'm in, you know, that kind of thing. But again, I don't tend to do that with people with FASD, and nor do I do breathing. Sometimes they'll themselves, as we're doing the tapping, initiate it. So we start at the top of the head and move on down. And if you're doing this with us, just a gentle tapping, the back of the head, up to the forehead, down the sides, and to the temporomandibular joint, which also is really affected by proprioception. So you really want to give it a good help there. Across the lips, and again, because sensory is so important with the mouth, I tend to spend more time there. And then down to the chin and up towards the ear, tapping a bit more on the temporomandibular joint, down the neck, across the shoulders, across the front of the chest, and back, and then down the arms. Normally, I wouldn't have the arms up, they would be down. And if you wanted, you could do your legs as well. So I find that a good, it can work two ways. It can alert a person who is quite low tone, or it can help them, a person who's quite hyper relaxed down. On to the next one. But even more, my favorite is this one, which is heart tapping. And again, I don't talk through it, nor do I do deep breathing. I find that at about 3 taps in, people take a deep breath and they themselves will slow down their heart tapping. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear, but what I do is da 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 da. So it's like the heart beating. One of the things that I like about this one is you can do it when you just about anywhere you are, and it's not something that people are going to notice. Whereas if you're tapping your head, they're going to. And some people are taught to do this kind of tapping, and that's fine too. But you can also just do one hand.
I think a really unique piece as well is that that's not just a strategy for individuals with FASD. I think as caregivers and support people, when we're in those heightened situations, or we need to calm ourselves as well. I do like it every time I do that, and especially when you're in the space and you're leading it, I feel my whole body just like whew, you know, and it's a good tool to have in your toolkit. And like you said, people don't really notice. Yeah. Right? You could be sitting in a space and doing it and just taking, you know, calming yourself. And yeah, it's a good tool for everyone.
Yeah, and it also gives a moment of stopping, right? So you're watching, you're seeing that your child is escalating and you're worrying that there may be a meltdown. The stop and let's do our heart tap.
No, it's such a good strategy.
Yeah. So on to auditory processing. And so for this one, we want to make sure that there's really good assessment if there's a feeling of auditory processing challenges. When I'm describing auditory processing, I like to talk about my son. I don't know if Keisha has examples, but with my son, he has a really interesting auditory processing challenge. He can look at the person who's speaking, or he can listen to the person who's speaking, but he can't do both. So if you think about that for a sec, he can watch the person or he can hear the person. If he's watching the person, he probably won't get much of what the person is saying. And of course, what do we say when our children, or what do our teachers say when we as students aren't looking?
Look at me when I talk to you. Look at me, make eye contact so I know that you're listening.
Yeah. So my son is 42. It was years into school before we figured this one out, because there wasn't a lot of knowledge of things like this. Once he understood this, we were able to really adapt situations, and it didn't take that long to do that. So we talked to teachers. They understood that he needed to look away. His volunteer work right now is with Microsoft. He answers calls around problems with their gaming systems. And it's a perfect job. He wears earphones. He hears the person. He never sees them. So he doesn't have to look at them, and they don't realize that he can't look at them, and he can just focus on what they're saying, and he's able to provide the information that they need. So when we're looking at auditory processing challenges, we're slowing down our speech, using less words, using same words. We use visuals, and that's really important to reinforce auditory learning, and wear ear protection and noise canceling earphones. And that's in all kinds of circumstances, in class, when they're doing loud tasks, sitting in spots where you're more likely to hear the speaker, and of course, using a therapeutic program. The ideal would be to have the OT, the speech language pathologist, and the audiologist all working together to put together a program for a person.
And that's who would do the assessment to find out if there is an auto processing difficulties, right?
You might find out through the sensory assessment that there's auditory processing challenges. You'd want to further focus on it through speech language pathology and audiologists who have training in the area. And so throughout, we're always looking at professionals who have that extra bit of training to be able to focus on that.
And just before we hit the next slide, I know we're coming up on time here pretty quick, but one of the intriguing things that I learned from you is how auditory processing can present in a variety of different ways, right? It can be, and I found that really, really intriguing. And it's an area which is highly misunderstood.
Absolutely it is. And you might be observing the same thing in a person, but it'd be very different issues. So with my son, his staring out the window was quite a severe auditory processing challenge. My daughter, at the same grade, the teacher said exactly the same thing about, but it was not the same issue. With her issue, it was comprehension, and she could not, the teacher was providing information too quickly for her to be able to follow, and so she became lost in the teaching and would stare out the window instead.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you can see the very same behavior, but for very different reasons.
Yeah, and that's always, it's always being that detective to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. So smell and taste processing. Again, this is a big area. It's kind of within the fetal development, is quite early on that this develops, and from a kind of human development is also early on in our becoming human beings. So quite regularly seen with people with FASD. My son could not stand hearing people chewing around him. It drove him nuts, and that was part of his auditory problems, but affected his ability to sit and have a meal with us. Yeah. And Keisha has had lots of challenges.
Yeah, in lots of these different areas when it comes to smell and taste as well. I think there's really, I always say too, there's unique ways to use some of this as strategies as well, to use it as a positive. She has a very heightened sense of smell, but a hard time sleeping. So sometimes we'll say we'll put a certain smell in her bedroom at nighttime. And so she associates that smell with bedtime. But I have to find smells that she likes. I can't do that for her. She has to go and pick those smells. She has a spray that she puts on her pillowcase, a sleep spray. I think it's lavender that she's picked out. So every night before she goes to bed, she sprays her pillowcase, right? So it's all creating that sensory environment. Or sometimes kiddos or individuals with FASD are deemed fussy eaters, right? Yeah. Oh, they're so fussy, they don't, but is it that they're fussy, or the taste and the texture and the smell of what they're eating is impacting them?
Absolutely. And so they're gonna go to, and having them choose their own is really important. And they'll either go towards needing non-scented products, low intensity smells, to those who need lots of change and want high intensity smells. And of course, you're going to want to make sure in people who don't have much sense of smell that smoke detectors are working, for example, that food is labeled in the fridge so that they're not eating food that's gone bad. And again, a therapeutic program is really important for these folks. And then finally, they may need reminding to bathe because they may not notice that they need bathing, or they may need cueing regarding the amount of fragrance they use. They may overly use fragrances on their body, and people around them may be affected by that. So one of the things with smell and taste that we wanted to touch on is the complexity that we're dealing with around FASD and sensory processing. So both of these areas on their own are really complex, aren't they?
Yeah.
And eating involves all of these things plus some more that are on your slide. So our jaw needs to work appropriately. Our proprioception needs to help us know how hard to bite. And it may be painful to chew without the jaw being able to close properly. We've got problems with eating. Muscles of the face, swallowing, taste, the sense of taste, smell, tactile, hearing, interoception, all are involved. Our memories of what it's like to eat that food and our emotions around eating all come into play. So really complex area for us to look at.
I remember when my kiddo was younger, when she was like in just, I know we're running out of time, but when she was, she would eat and we'd have to, her memory, like there was a misconnection. And so you'd have to remind her that there was food in her mouth and she needed to chew it. And then sometimes she wouldn't chew it enough. So you'd have to give like lots of reminders as she was eating, because she would honestly forget that it was almost like she couldn't feel it, right? And she needed those reminders and prompts.
Okay, so we're on to visual processing. And just to say, visual processing is also really complex. And something like 13 different areas of the brain have involvement in our visual processing. And so we need to cover over extraneous visual material and highlight where they should focus their vision. So in school, it's really important to have a clear visual line and towards whatever the teacher is teaching, and not a lot to take their attention away. They may need to use their fingers to help them feel what an object is like. So they've got that memory, not just a visual memory. You may need to color code classrooms and common areas such as lockers. So Bob may need a blue color on his locker to remind him that that's his, and may need blue on all of his belongings so he knows what's his versus what's other people's. Bright color strips on your stairs, doorways, and corners. Computer games can help train. Using bright colored balls for ball games so that they can see the ball moving towards them. And again, specific therapeutic interventions.
Absolutely. And I think you have an example here of color coding. I like that. We color code lots as well. It's absolutely helping. And I like, that visual when I think we chatted about it before, it can be like calming or alarming as well, right?
That's right. That's right. For sure. And I think the next one talks about that. Just the way that you calm the person versus alerting them. And you need to think about all the senses this way. What is calming for them versus what's alerting, as that sensory diet is put together. I think we should go.
Yeah, I think it's something we're always learning too, right? That sensory piece changes across their lifespan, and it's this continuous journey of learning how it impacts them. And I think also as our individuals with FASD age, always remember they have a voice, and they can share.
Yes. There is research happening in the field of FASD and sensory processing, and I wanted to give you just two examples. One is from Canada, Manitoba, where they found that a number of differences in scores and recommended sensory processing be assessed when working with people with FASD. And a more recent one, which I talked about earlier, 325 kids in Washington State, 3 to 11 years old, diagnosed with FASD. And 73% of the children's total scores were in the definite difference range. And their conclusion is that altered sensory processing is another domain of brain function affected by prenatal alcohol exposure. And I really hope that when the next iteration of the assessment of people with FASD comes out, that sensory processing is one of the domains looked at.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Shana and Lisa. So I'll let you wrap up, and then we'll just go to questions.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I'll maybe hand it over to Lisa. Do you have any finishing words?
So there's lots more to learn. This was a pretty fast and basic, even though we've done, instead of 1 hour, 3 hours, really, we've just touched on this. And hopefully we've provided a list of resources that will help you go further. And this is just a really important area, and really changing the environment can radically change outcomes for people. And how we need to continuously change our expectations and understanding. When our children learn what environments improve function, they learn to self-advocate, their lives go better, and indeed all of our lives go better as a result. Shana?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. It's I'll always chat about the sensory piece because it's made an impactful difference in our lives. And I always share that I'm at places with our kiddo that I didn't think we'd ever be. And that's very much a thank you to OT, sensory-based OT, and learning about how her sensory world impacts her. I think there's lots of strengths in it as well. There's lots of different pieces, you know, someone with a heightened sense of hearing presents some challenges, but in the art community, that's a huge strength. You know, when our kiddos can hear stuff that nobody else can hear, how do we take a strength-based approach to that? So I think there's so much more to learn, but I know we're out of time, so we'll leave it at that. And again, a huge thank you to CanFASD for hosting the webinar, and a huge thank you to Lisa Brownstone as well.